It was a freezing December evening in Chicago. The wind howled through the streets, and heavy rain covered everything in a blanket of cold misery. Most people hurried past without looking around, eager to get home before the weather became worse. 32-year-old Sarah Miller tightened her old coat around herself as she stepped out of the grocery store with 2 bags in her hands. Life had not been easy. Ever since her husband passed away 4 years earlier, she had been raising her 7-year-old daughter, Emma, all by herself. Sarah worked long hours at a small diner near downtown Chicago, trying her best to provide a decent life for her little girl. Their apartment wasn't fancy. Their old Toyota Camry had nearly 200,000 miles on it, but every night Emma went to bed with a smile, and that was enough for Sarah. As she loaded the groceries into her car, she noticed someone sitting alone on a bus stop bench, an elderly man. His clothes were soaked, his hands trembled from the cold, and despite the rain pouring down, nobody had stopped to help him. People simply walked by. Sarah looked at the clock. She was already late. Emma was waiting at home with the babysitter. She sighed, then grabbed her umbrella. "Sir?" she asked gently. The old man slowly looked up. His silver hair was wet and his face was pale. "Are you all right?" Sarah asked. The man forced a weak smile. "My phone died, and I think I missed the last bus." Sarah frowned. "In this weather?" The man nodded. "I'll manage." But Sarah knew he wouldn't. Not tonight. Not with temperatures dropping below freezing. "Come on," Sarah said. "I'll drive you." The old man looked surprised. "You don't know me?" Sarah smiled. "My mother taught me something a long time ago." "And what was that?" he asked. "Nobody should be left alone in the rain." The old man's eyes became emotional. Together they walked toward her old Toyota Camry. Inside the car, warm air slowly filled the cabin. "I'm Sarah," she said. "Henry." "Nice to meet you, Henry." Henry chuckled. "It's been a long time since someone said that." As they drove through downtown Chicago, Sarah noticed Henry shivering. Without saying anything, she handed him the blanket she kept for Emma. Henry looked touched. "You remind me of someone," he whispered. Sarah smiled. "My dad used to say that." "Was he kind?" "The kindest man I ever knew." Henry quietly stared outside the window. Streetlights reflected on the wet pavement. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Then Henry suddenly said, "Where are you headed after dropping me off?" "Home." "And who waits for you there?" "My daughter." "You have children?" "Just one." Henry smiled. "You're fortunate." Sarah glanced over. "Do you have family?" The old man's smile faded. "I used to." Before Sarah could ask another question, Henry pointed toward a neighborhood. "Right there." They stopped in front of a modest motel. Sarah blinked. "You live here?" "For now." The answer didn't feel right, but she didn't press him. As Henry stepped out, he reached into his pocket. Sarah immediately shook her head. "No, no, please." "I wasn't offering money." Henry pulled out an old silver coin. "It belonged to my father." Sarah smiled. "You should keep it." Henry slowly put it away. Then he looked directly into her eyes. "Sarah?" "Yes?" "Thank you." His voice carried something deeper, something almost painful. "You saved an old man from freezing tonight." Sarah laughed softly. "I just gave someone a ride." "No." Henry smiled warmly. "You gave me hope." And with that, he disappeared inside the motel. Meanwhile, 7-year-old Emma sat by the window of their apartment. When Sarah entered, Emma ran into her arms. "Mommy!" Sarah hugged her tightly. "Sorry I'm late." The babysitter smiled. "No worries." Emma looked excited. "Did you bring ice cream?" Sarah laughed. "Of course." For the next hour, mother and daughter sat on the couch watching Christmas movies while eating chocolate ice cream. Outside, the rain continued, but inside, everything felt peaceful. By the way, stories have a strange way of finding the people who enjoy them,
and some folks around here always leave behind thoughtful words, share moments with friends and family, and make this little corner feel like home. Those quiet gestures never go unnoticed. The next morning, Sarah woke up early. She made pancakes for Emma, packed her lunch, and prepared for another ordinary day. Or at least, that's what she thought. At exactly 8:15 a.m., suddenly Emma gasped, "Mommy!" Sarah looked up. "What is it?" Emma stood near the window with wide eyes. "There's a huge car outside." Sarah walked over and froze. Parked in front of their apartment building was a shiny black Cadillac Escalade. Two men in suits stood beside it. Several neighbors had already gathered outside. Everyone was staring. Sarah's heart raced. "Mommy?" Emma whispered. "Are they movie stars?" Sarah forced a smile. "I don't know." A few seconds later, one of the men approached the apartment entrance. Knock, knock, knock. Sarah carefully opened the door. The man smiled politely. "Good morning. Can I help you? Mrs. Sarah Miller?" "Yes. My name is Robert." He handed her an envelope. "This was left for you." Sarah looked confused. "Who sent this?" Robert smiled. "Mr. Henry Walker." Her eyes widened. "The gentleman from last night?" "Yes, ma'am." Sarah stared at the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. Her hands trembled slightly as she unfolded it, and suddenly she recognized Henry's handwriting. The first line made her stop breathing for a second. "Dear Sarah, after last night, I finally remembered what kindness feels like." Tears unexpectedly formed in her eyes. Emma tugged on her sleeve. "Mommy?" But Sarah couldn't speak because she had absolutely no idea who Henry Walker really was.
Sarah stood frozen in the doorway. Rain from the night before had disappeared, but the cold Chicago air still lingered outside. Little Emma held tightly onto her mother's hand. "Mommy, are you okay?" she asked softly. Sarah blinked. "Yes, sweetheart." But she wasn't, because the name written at the bottom of the letter had suddenly caught her attention. Henry Walker. Underneath it, Chairman Emeritus, Walker Automotive Group. Sarah frowned. She had heard that name before. Everyone had. Walker Automotive was one of America's largest luxury vehicle companies, famous for producing high-end SUVs and electric trucks. The company was worth billions, and somehow the old man she had picked up in the rain had signed this letter. Robert cleared his throat. "Mr. Walker asked me to personally deliver this." Sarah looked up. "I'm sorry, but there must be some mistake." Robert smiled. "There is no mistake, Mrs. Miller." Emma whispered, "Mommy, billion means really rich, right?" Robert laughed. "Very rich." Sarah stared at him. "This can't be real." "Mr. Walker expected you'd say that." He handed her another envelope. Inside were several photographs. Sarah's eyes widened. They showed Henry. The same soaked clothes, the same bus stop, the same blanket Emma used during road trips. And one photo showed Henry smiling inside Sarah's old Toyota Camry. Her heart skipped. "Who took these?" "Security personnel." Sarah blinked. "Security?" Robert nodded. "Mr. Walker disappeared from his residence yesterday afternoon." "What?" "For nearly 8 hours. His entire family office was searching for him." Sarah could hardly believe it. "He never told me any of this." Robert smiled. "He wanted kindness." "What do you mean?" "After losing his wife and retiring from the company, many people treated him differently." Robert's voice became quiet. Everyone wanted something: money, influence, connections. But you, he smiled warmly, you only gave him your umbrella. Emma grinned proudly. "My mommy is nice." Robert laughed. "Yes, she is." Sarah looked down at the letter again. Halfway through, another sentence caught her eye. You reminded me of the daughter I lost 30 years ago." Her eyes softened. "Daughter?" she whispered. Robert nodded. "Emily Walker." "What happened?" "Car accident." Sarah immediately felt pain in her chest. Henry had lost his daughter. His wife had passed away 3 years earlier, and now he spent most days alone. No wonder there had been sadness in his eyes. 3 hours later, Sarah arrived at the diner where she worked. The breakfast rush had already begun. Customers filled every booth. Her friend and co-worker, Jessica, noticed her distracted expression. "Girl, you look like you've seen a ghost." Sarah laughed nervously. "You wouldn't believe me. Try me." Sarah showed her the letter. Jessica nearly dropped a coffee pot. "Wait," she read the signature again. "No way!" Sarah sighed. "I know." Jessica stared. "You gave a billionaire a ride?" "Apparently." Jessica shook her head. "Meanwhile, I only attract guys with bad credit." Both women burst out laughing. For the first time that morning, Sarah relaxed. But just then, the diner's owner, Mike Henderson, walked over. "Sarah," his voice sounded serious, "we need to talk." Her stomach sank. Mike rarely sounded like that. She followed him into his office. Mike rubbed the back of his neck. "I'm sorry." "Sorry for what?" "The business isn't doing well." Her face fell. Mike looked genuinely upset. "I've held off as long as I could." "No." "I'm letting 2 people go." Her eyes watered. "And I'm one of them." Mike nodded sadly. "You know I'd keep you if I could." Sarah forced a smile. "It's okay." But it wasn't. Rent, school expenses, car insurance, groceries, everything flashed through her mind. She quietly packed her belongings. Jessica hugged her. "You'll find something." Sarah smiled weakly. "I hope so." That evening, Emma noticed immediately. "Mommy." Sarah turned. "Yes? Did something bad happen?" Children always knew. Sarah sat beside her daughter. "I lost my job today." Emma thought for a moment, then hugged her tightly. "It's okay." Sarah smiled through tears. "Why?" "Because we're a team." Those simple words nearly broke her. She hugged Emma even tighter. "Yes, we are." Around 7 o'clock, someone knocked on the door. Sarah opened it, and her jaw dropped. Standing outside was Henry. But this time, gone were the wet clothes. Gone was the tired appearance. Instead, he wore a dark navy overcoat. Behind him stood 2 security guards, and parked nearby was a beautiful black Cadillac Escalade. Henry smiled. "Good evening, Sarah." She blinked. "Henry?" Emma ran forward. "Grandpa Henry!" The old man laughed. "Hello, Princess Emma." He handed her a teddy bear. Emma's eyes sparkled. "For me?" "Of course." She hugged him immediately. Henry's eyes became emotional. He hadn't received a hug like that in years. Sarah invited him inside. The apartment was small, simple, nothing luxurious, but Henry smiled as he looked around. "It feels warm here." Emma proudly showed him her drawings. "My mommy made pancakes today." Henry chuckled. "Did she?" "And she burns toast sometimes." "Emma!" Henry laughed loudly. "I like honesty." After a while, Emma disappeared into her room. Henry's smile slowly faded. "Sarah?" "Yes?" "I heard about your job." She looked surprised. "How?" "Chicago's a small world." He paused. "Would you allow an old man to help?" Sarah immediately shook her head. "No." Henry smiled. "I appreciate everything, but I don't want charity." "Good." He nodded approvingly. "Because I don't believe in charity." Sarah looked confused. "What do you mean?" Henry reached into his coat and placed a folder on the table. "What is this?" "A job offer." Sarah blinked. "For me?" "Yes." She slowly opened it and nearly dropped it. "Customer Relations Director, Walker Automotive Foundation. Annual salary, $145,000. Full benefits, health insurance, retirement plan." Her mouth fell open. "Henry!" He raised a hand.
Wait, you haven't even heard the reason. Sarah stared. The reason? Henry smiled. My daughter Emily loved helping people. His eyes became distant. She believed kindness mattered more than money. Just like you. He took a deep breath. The foundation needs someone with heart, not someone with degrees hanging on walls. Someone real. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. But why me? Henry smiled. Because kindness can't be taught. And last night, he looked toward Emma's room. I saw the kind of woman my daughter would have become. Sarah couldn't hold back tears. Neither could Henry. For several seconds, neither spoke. Finally, Henry smiled again. So, Mrs. Miller, would you consider working with an old man? Sarah laughed through tears, and for the first time since losing her job, hope returned. But neither of them noticed. Across the street, a man inside a silver Chevrolet Tahoe was watching the apartment, watching Henry, watching Sarah, and the anger in his eyes was impossible to hide.
The man inside the silver Chevrolet Tahoe lowered his sunglasses and stared at Sarah's apartment. His jaw tightened. His fingers tapped impatiently against the steering wheel. Unbelievable, he muttered. Inside the apartment, Henry Walker was laughing with Emma as she showed him her collection of stuffed animals. And this one is Mr. Pickles. Henry smiled. Mr. Pickles looks very distinguished. Emma giggled. And this one is Princess Sparkles. Oh my goodness! Henry placed a hand over his heart. She's royalty! Sarah couldn't help smiling. She hadn't seen Emma laugh this much in months. And strangely, she hadn't seen Henry smile this much either. The old man seemed different, alive, happy, like a heavy burden had finally been lifted. After another hour, Henry stood up. I should head home. Emma immediately frowned. So soon? Henry smiled. I'll come back. Promise? He gently crossed his heart. I promise, Princess Emma. She hugged him tightly, and for a moment, Henry closed his eyes. Because 30 years ago, his daughter Emily used to hug him exactly the same way. As Henry walked outside, Robert opened the door of the Cadillac Escalade. But before Henry could enter, a voice interrupted. Dad! Henry froze. Robert sighed quietly. Not again. Standing beside the silver Chevrolet Tahoe was a man in his mid-40s. Expensive suit, perfect haircut, cold eyes. Richard Walker, Henry's only son and current CEO of Walker Automotive. Dad. Richard forced a smile. I've been looking everywhere for you. Henry's face hardened. I wasn't hiding. Richard glanced toward Sarah's apartment. So, this is where you've been. Henry said nothing. Dad, can we talk? We are talking. Richard sighed. Not here. But Henry climbed into the SUV. I'm tired. The door shut, leaving Richard standing alone. His expression darkened. The next morning, Sarah arrived at Walker Automotive Foundation headquarters. The building stood proudly in downtown Chicago, 40 stories high, glass walls, luxury cars parked outside. Everything looked intimidating. She glanced at her reflection. Simple blue blouse, black pants, nothing fancy. She suddenly felt out of place. The receptionist smiled. Good morning, Mrs. Miller. Sarah blinked. You know my name? Everyone does. Before she could ask another question, Robert appeared. Welcome. Thanks. He smiled warmly. Mr. Walker has been waiting. As they entered the executive floor, employees greeted her respectfully, which only made Sarah more nervous. Finally, the office doors opened. Henry stood beside the window. Good morning. Sarah smiled. You came. I offered you a job. Henry laughed. True. Would have been awkward if I didn't. Both laughed. Then Henry introduced her to several department heads. Most welcomed her kindly, except one, Richard Walker. He entered the conference room, tall, confident, sharp suit, and eyes as cold as winter. Dad?
Henry nodded. "Richard." His gaze shifted toward Sarah. "So, this is Mrs. Miller." Sarah offered her hand. "Nice to meet you." Richard shook it, but his smile never reached his eyes. "Likewise." Henry immediately noticed, and so did Robert. Something was wrong, very wrong. 3 days later, Sarah had already transformed the atmosphere at the foundation. Employees smiled more, volunteers increased, donations doubled. People genuinely liked working with her. Even Henry seemed happier. But Richard noticed something else. His father. For the first time in years, Henry wasn't lonely. And strangely, that bothered him, because for years Richard had controlled every part of the company, every decision, every meeting, every schedule. But now, his father had someone he trusted, someone who wasn't him. That evening, Richard entered his penthouse office. His assistant, Monica, followed. "You wanted to see me?" Richard poured himself coffee.
I want information. On who? Sarah Miller. Monica frowned. Sir? Everything. Background, finances, family, friends. Monica looked uncomfortable. Mr. Walker, just do it. Meanwhile, at Sarah's apartment, Henry sat on the floor playing tea party with Emma. Grandpa Henry? Yes, Princess? You're doing it wrong. Henry laughed. I suspected that. The bunny gets 2 cookies. 2 cookies? He's a growing bunny. Sarah burst out laughing from the kitchen. Henry smiled. I stand corrected. For the first time in many years, the mansion, the money, the board meetings, none of it mattered. This felt like family. Later that night, as Sarah washed dishes, Henry quietly spoke. Sarah, yes? I never thanked you. You already have. No. His voice became emotional. You gave me something money couldn't buy. Sarah smiled softly. What's that? A reason to wake up. She looked at him and suddenly saw tears in his eyes. I spent 3 years sitting in empty rooms, 3 years talking to walls, 3 years pretending I was fine. His voice trembled. But I wasn't. Sarah gently touched his hand. Henry. And then, he smiled, you appeared. Neither spoke for several seconds. Then Emma came running out. Movie time! Henry immediately wiped his tears. Movie time it is. The following morning, Richard sat inside his office. Monica entered carrying a folder. You asked for information? Richard opened it. Simple life. No criminal history. No debts. Widowed. Hard-working. Good reputation. Nothing suspicious. Richard frowned. That's all? Yes. Monica smiled. Honestly, she seems like a wonderful woman. Richard tossed the file onto the desk. There has to be something. There isn't. Monica hesitated. Maybe she's simply kind. Richard scoffed. Nobody is simply kind. But deep inside, he wasn't angry because Sarah wanted money. He was angry because she didn't, and that confused him. Saturday afternoon, Henry invited Sarah and Emma to his mansion. Emma's eyes nearly exploded. Grandpa Henry lives in a castle. Henry laughed. It's just a house. No, Emma whispered. It's a castle. The staff smiled warmly. Everyone had noticed the change in Mr. Walker. For years, he barely spoke. Now he laughed, he joked, he smiled, and the entire house felt alive again. As they walked through the garden, Sarah stopped. A beautiful statue stood beneath a tree. A young woman. Flowers surrounded it. Henry became quiet. Emily. Sarah understood immediately. My daughter. He smiled sadly. My daughter. She was 22. Beautiful. Kind. Too kind for this world. Sarah stood beside him. Neither spoke.
The breeze moved gently through the trees. Then Henry whispered, "Sometimes I wonder what she'd look like today." His voice cracked, and then he looked at Sarah. "I stop wondering." Sarah's eyes widened. "Henry." "No," he smiled softly. "I know you're not my daughter, but life has strange ways of healing broken hearts." Tears rolled down Sarah's cheeks, and behind them, standing near the mansion entrance, Richard had heard everything, every word, and suddenly fear entered his heart, because for the first time in his life he realized something terrifying. He wasn't losing the company, he wasn't losing money, he wasn't losing power, he was losing his father, and he had absolutely no idea how to stop it.
Richard Walker stood silently near the entrance of the garden. His father's words echoed in his mind. Life has strange ways of healing broken hearts. For the first time, Richard felt something he hadn't experienced in years: fear. Not fear of losing money, not fear of losing the company, but fear of losing the only parent he had left. And somehow, a woman named Sarah Miller had become the center of his father's happiness. Dinner that evening was unusually quiet. Emma, however, had no interest in silence. "Grandpa Henry?" Henry smiled. "Yes, Princess?" "When are you coming to my school play?" Henry blinked. "School play?" "Next Friday." "And what role are you playing?" Emma proudly lifted her chin. "A snowflake." Henry burst out laughing. "The most important role." Emma nodded seriously. "Exactly." Sarah laughed, but Richard simply watched. His father hadn't laughed like that since his mother's funeral, not once, and seeing that happiness should have made him feel relieved. Instead, something inside him hurt. Later that night, Richard entered his father's study. Henry sat beside the fireplace reading. Without looking up, he said, "Couldn't sleep?" Richard sighed. "You always knew." Henry smiled. "You used to sneak cookies at midnight." Richard chuckled. "Mom always blamed you, because I was guilty." For the first time in months, father and son shared a laugh, but it quickly faded. Richard sat down. "Dad?" Henry looked up. "Yes?" "Do you trust Sarah?" Henry closed the book. "Completely." Richard frowned. "You barely know her." Henry smiled. "Sometimes you know a person's heart faster than their history." Richard looked away. "Dad, people change." "So do lonely men." Richard froze. Henry's voice softened. "You think I'm blind." "I didn't say that." "No." Henry nodded. "But you've been treating me like I am." Silence filled the room. Finally, Henry spoke again. "Richard, when was the last time we had dinner together?" Richard couldn't answer. "When was the last time you called me just because you missed me?" Nothing. "When was the last time you asked if I was lonely?" Richard lowered his eyes because he didn't remember. The truth hurt. Richard had spent years building Walker Automotive into an even bigger empire. Meetings, flights, investments, interviews, everything had become business, and somewhere along the way, he had forgotten his father. Meanwhile, Sarah tucked Emma into bed. "Mummy?" "Yes, sweetheart?" "Grandpa Henry misses his family." Sarah smiled softly. "He does." Emma hugged her teddy bear. "Then we can share ours." Sarah's eyes became emotional. Children always saw things adults missed. The next week, excitement filled Emma's school. Parents prepared cameras, teachers decorated the stage, and children practiced their performances. Emma had only one concern. "Mommy, what if Grandpa Henry forgets?" Sarah smiled. "He promised." "But he's busy." "He'll come." Emma nodded, because Grandpa Henry always kept his promises. Friday evening arrived. The auditorium slowly filled.
Parents sat proudly, children nervously peeked from backstage. Emma kept searching the crowd, but there was no sign of Henry. 5 minutes before the show started, still nothing. Her little face fell. Sarah felt her heart sink. Maybe traffic? But Emma quietly whispered, "It's okay," though her eyes were already watery. Then, suddenly, the auditorium doors opened and everyone's heads turned. Henry Walker entered, wearing a Christmas sweater, a ridiculous red scarf, and carrying flowers. Emma gasped, "Grandpa Henry!" Henry waved proudly. "I'm here, Princess!" But he wasn't alone.
Beside him walked Richard, and behind them, Robert. Emma's smile became even bigger. Uncle Richard came too. Richard looked surprised. Uncle Richard? Henry laughed. Looks like you've been promoted. Even Richard couldn't stop smiling. During the performance, Henry clapped harder than anyone. When Emma appeared dressed as a snowflake, he stood up. "That's my granddaughter." The entire audience laughed. Sarah covered her face. "Henry!" But Emma laughed proudly, and Richard watched everything quietly. Something warm had begun to grow inside him, a feeling he hadn't felt in years. Family. After the show, Emma ran into Henry's arms. "Did you see me? I saw the brightest snowflake in America." She giggled, then grabbed Richard's hand. "And Uncle Richard saw me too." Richard smiled. "I sure did." "You clapped." "I did." "You smiled." "I think I did." Emma nodded. "You should smile more." Henry burst out laughing. She's right. Even Sarah laughed. And for the first time in years, Richard laughed too. 3 weeks later, Christmas arrived. Snow covered Chicago. Inside Sarah's apartment, the smell of cinnamon and cookies filled the air. Emma decorated the tree. Henry sat beside her, pretending not to steal candy canes, and Richard was struggling to wrap presents. "This is impossible." Sarah laughed. "It's wrapping paper, not rocket science. I run a billion-dollar company, and yet tape defeats you." Everyone laughed. After dinner, they exchanged gifts. Emma gave Henry a drawing. The old man stared at it. His eyes instantly filled with tears. It showed 4 people: Sarah, Emma, Henry, and Richard. Above them, written in crayon, was one sentence: "My family." Henry quietly wiped his eyes. "Princess?" "Yes?" "This is the greatest gift I've ever received." Richard swallowed hard because he saw tears in his father's eyes. Not tears of grief, not tears of loneliness, but tears of happiness. Later that evening, snow fell gently outside. Henry stood near the window. Sarah joined him. "You seem happy." Henry smiled. "I am. You deserve it." He nodded, then looked toward the living room. Emma had fallen asleep beside Richard on the couch, and amazingly, Richard had fallen asleep too. Both wore matching Santa hats. Henry laughed softly. "Look at them." Sarah smiled. "They look adorable." For several moments, neither spoke. Then Henry whispered, "You know." "What?" "I thought God had finished writing my story." Sarah looked at him, but then he smiled. He decided to add another chapter. Sarah squeezed his hand. "And it's a pretty good chapter." Henry chuckled. "The best one." But upstairs, inside his office at Walker Automotive, someone sat alone in darkness, watching photographs spread across the desk. Photographs of Henry, Sarah, Emma, and Richard. The man's expression was cold, filled with hatred. His name was Victor Kane, former vice president of Walker Automotive, the same man Richard had fired 6 months earlier. And now he quietly smiled, because revenge had finally found the perfect target.
And the Walker family had absolutely no idea that danger had already entered their lives.
Snow continued falling over Chicago. Inside Sarah's apartment, everything felt peaceful. Emma slept soundly on the couch. Richard snored softly beside her, still wearing the crooked Santa hat she had placed on his head. Henry stood near the Christmas tree, smiling. For the first time in years, he wasn't lonely. And that night, he went to bed with something he thought he had lost forever: peace. But across the city, Victor Kane sat alone inside his penthouse office. His eyes burned with hatred. 6 months earlier, Richard Walker had fired him after discovering millions of dollars missing from company accounts. Victor had lost everything: his position, his reputation, his friends. And in his mind, the Walker family was responsible. He stared at photographs spread across his desk: Henry, Richard, Sarah, Emma. His lips slowly curved into a smile. "If I can't destroy the company," he whispered, "I'll destroy their happiness." 3 days later, Walker Automotive Foundation hosted its annual charity gala. Business leaders, celebrities, reporters, everyone attended. Sarah wore a simple navy blue dress. Henry smiled proudly. "You look wonderful." Sarah laughed. "That's because Emma is always right." Nearby, Richard adjusted his tie, still uncomfortable with fancy events, and Emma was busy stealing cookies from the dessert table. "Princess," Henry whispered, "I saw that." Emma grinned. "No, you didn't." Everyone laughed. As the evening continued, Henry stepped onto the stage. The audience immediately stood and applauded, but Henry raised his hand. "Tonight isn't about me," he smiled. "It's about kindness." His eyes searched the crowd until they landed on Sarah. "3 months ago," he began, "I sat alone in the rain, cold, forgotten, and honestly," he paused, "I had lost hope." The room became silent. But one person stopped. One person saw an old man, not money, not influence, not status, just a human being. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Henry smiled. Sarah Miller. Everyone turned, and suddenly the entire ballroom stood up. Applause thundered through the room. Sarah covered her face. "Oh no." Richard laughed. "Too late." Emma jumped excitedly. "That's my mommy." The audience laughed. Henry continued. "Because of her, I found family again, and for that, I'll be grateful for the rest of my life." Even reporters wiped away tears. But hidden among the guests, Victor Kane watched, and anger consumed him. "Family," he muttered. "We'll see." The next morning, disaster struck. News channels exploded. Headlines appeared everywhere. Walker Automotive Chairman Henry Walker hospitalized. Sarah nearly dropped her coffee. Emma looked scared. "Mommy?" Sarah immediately grabbed her keys. At the hospital, she found Richard sitting alone. His face looked pale. "Richard!" She stood up. "Sarah!" "How is he?" Richard swallowed hard. "The doctors say he'll recover." Sarah sighed of relief. "What happened?" "Minor heart attack." Tears filled Richard's eyes. "I almost lost him." Sarah hugged him. And for the first time since childhood, Richard cried. Not as a billionaire, not as a CEO, just as a son. Hours later, Henry woke up, and the first thing he saw was Emma sleeping beside his bed, still holding his hand. The old man's eyes filled with tears. Richard smiled. She refused to leave. Henry laughed weakly. Stubborn. Like someone else I know. Richard smiled. Yeah, like you. Father and son laughed, and somehow, years of distance began disappearing. Meanwhile, federal agents entered Victor Kane's office. Victor Kane? He stood. Yes, we have a warrant. Victor froze. What? Investigators had finally uncovered the missing money. Offshore accounts, fake contracts, hidden transfers, everything. Victor's face turned white. This is impossible. An agent smiled. No, it's justice. Minutes later, Victor Kane was led away in handcuffs, and with him, every threat against the Walker family disappeared. Spring arrived. Flowers replaced snow, and life moved forward. One Sunday afternoon, Henry invited everyone to the mansion. Emma ran through the garden. Richard cooked hamburgers, though nobody trusted him near the grill. Richard, Sarah laughed, those burgers are black. They add flavor. They add fire. Henry nearly choked laughing. She's right. For the next hour, they laughed, teased each other, and made memories, simple memories, the kind money could never buy. As sunset painted the sky orange, Henry slowly stood up. Everyone. They looked at him. He smiled. I have something to say. Emma gasped. You're getting married? Richard burst out laughing. Sarah nearly dropped her lemonade. Henry laughed. No, princess, not today. Everyone laughed. Then Henry became emotional. When Emily died, he whispered, I thought my heart died with her. Silence filled the garden. When my wife passed away, I believed I had nothing left. His eyes watered. But God had other plans. He looked at Sarah. You gave me hope. Then at Emma. You gave me joy. Then at Richard. And you gave me another chance to be your father. Richard's eyes became red. Finally, Henry smiled. And together, you gave an old man his family back. Nobody spoke, because everyone was crying. Even Richard, especially Richard. Later that evening, Emma sat beside Henry beneath the same tree where Emily's statue stood. Grandpa, yes, princess? Were you lonely before? Henry smiled softly. Very. Emma hugged him. Not anymore? No, he whispered. Not anymore. She looked up. Families don't have to match, right? Henry's eyes filled with tears. No, they don't. They just have to love each other. Emma smiled proudly. Good, because you're stuck with us. Henry laughed through tears, and I'm the luckiest man alive. Years later, people often asked Henry Walker what the greatest investment of his life had been. Billions of dollars, luxury cars, business empires? Henry always smiled and gave the same answer. One rainy night, when a tired single mother stopped her old Toyota Camry and showed an old man that kindness still existed, that, he would say, was the greatest blessing of my life. Because sometimes the smallest act of kindness creates the biggest miracle. And sometimes family isn't found by blood, it's found by love. Before you go, tell us this. Would you have stopped to help Henry on that rainy night? Leave your answer in the comments, send this story to a friend or family member, and stay with us for more emotional journeys that remind us why kindness still matters.